Just after sunset, little Maddie vanished from the corner park, only 1 block from home. The whole town searched, but hope thinned fast. Then, hours later, on a silent rainy night, the living room window suddenly echoed with 3 soft taps, followed by 1 long, chilling scrape. When her parents pulled the curtain back, it wasn't a neighbor or an officer standing on the porch. It was the K-9, holding a clue he should never have been able to find. T'es tout bon. Petit. The late afternoon sun settled over the little Ohio town like a tired eyelid, half closed and golden. In the driveway of a small blue house near the river, Tom wiped grease off his hands and leaned over the open hood of an old pickup. The engine coughed, then caught, humming rough but steady. For a second, life felt simple again, almost boring in a way he didn't mind at all. On the cracked concrete at his feet, bright chalk lines turned gray stains into castles and crooked stars. Maddie lay on her stomach, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, drawing a giant dog with floppy ears and a badge on its collar. Every few seconds she glanced up at her dad as if to make sure the world was still there, still safe, still his same old garage and his same old tools. Inside the house, Laura moved between the small kitchen and the table, sliding a casserole into the oven, checking her phone for messages from the hospital. Her night shift loomed in the back of her mind, the way storms collected on the horizon. She heard the truck engine rumble and felt a brief, quiet pride. Tom could fix almost anything with an engine. Almost. From the street a siren wailed in the distance, then faded. Maddie lifted her head, listening. She always did when she heard that sound, as though it belonged to a friend. Tom straightened and wiped his forehead with his wrist. "Probably Harper's unit," he muttered. Somewhere across town, the K-9 SUV would be rolling, lights off now, heading back to the station, dog in the back, finally done with the day. Maddie pushed a loose curl from her face and added a badge to her chalk dog. "This one's a hero," she said to no one in particular. She dug into the box, grabbed a yellow stick of chalk, and wrote a shaky name above it. Odin, letters too big and leaning. She'd only seen the real K-9 once at a school talk, but the memory had glued itself to her. Laura stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. The evening light softened the lines under her eyes, turned her scrubs almost silver. 10 more minutes, kiddo," she called. "Then I've got to get ready. Aunt Deb's on call tonight, so it's just you and Dad." Maddie nodded without looking up, as though deals with time were easy at 6 years old. A breeze drifted up from the river, carrying the smell of wet earth and cut grass. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular, then stopped. On the corner, Mrs. Collins sat on her porch swing, watching the street the way she watched every street she'd ever lived on, inventorying faces and routines without meaning to. She waved at Tom. He lifted a hand and half smiled, already thinking about the next job in the garage. "Dad?" Maddie finally spoke, pushing herself to her feet. Chalk dust dusted her knees and palms. "Can I go to the park for 5 minutes? Just 5. She held up her right hand, all fingers spread, as if showing a contract. The corner park sat only 1 block away, small and fenced, its swings crooked but still swinging. Tom hesitated. The word "no" rose automatically, then thinned in his throat. The town was small. It was early evening. He could still hear kids shouting faintly from somewhere down the block. His shoulders, sore from the day, sagged. 5 minutes, he said. "Straight there, straight back, no stopping. You hear me?" Maddie's whole face lit up. She dashed inside, grabbed her little denim backpack from a chair. The blue keychain with her name in plastic letters clinked against the zipper as she swung it on. She paused just long enough to give Laura a quick sideways hug around the waist. "Bye, Mom. I'll be back before you put on your shoes." Laura smoothed her hair, swallowing a small, shapeless worry that had no name yet. Out on the sidewalk, Maddie hopped once on each chalk star she'd drawn earlier, then trotted toward the corner. Mrs. Collins watched her go, the way older eyes always tracked small moving shapes. A bike bell rang as Jenny from next door zipped by, earbuds in, waving a careless hello. The ordinary noise of an ordinary street folded around them like a blanket. Tom bent back over the engine, listening to the familiar clink and tick of cooling metal. He told himself he could hear Maddie's steps if he tried hard enough, told himself 5 minutes was nothing. Inside the kitchen, Laura set out plates for 3 out of habit, then caught herself stacking one back into the cabinet. She glanced at the clock and felt those 5 minutes stretch a little longer than they should. At the far end of town, Odin lay on the cool concrete of his kennel at the station, head resting on his paws, chest rising in slow, steady breaths. The day's searches and traffic stops had settled into a blur of sense in his mind. He twitched once, like he smelled something he couldn't quite place yet. Harper walked past, pausing to check his latch with a tired automatic motion before turning off the main hall light. Back on Maple Street, the sun slipped lower, laying long, thin shadows across the chalk drawings. The air cooled by a tiny degree, barely enough to notice. 5 minutes came and went, and no small backpack rustled at the gate, no sneakers scuffed across the driveway. The quiet that followed didn't crash in all at once. It arrived slowly, politely, like a stranger knocking on a door no one wanted to open. Tom didn't notice the time until the truck's engine finally settled into a smoother idle. He checked. The dash then glanced toward the street. The corner where Maddie should reappear was empty, washed in the soft wash of a street lamp flickering on too early. He wiped his hands again, telling himself she was probably stopping to show someone her chalk-covered palms. Inside, Laura closed a cabinet and looked at the clock the same moment. 10 minutes. She frowned, drying her hands a little harder on the towel. In this town, 10 minutes usually meant nothing. A neighbor stopping to chat, a hop across the street to see a stray cat. But something about the silence outside made her stomach tighten, like a string pulled one notch too far. Tom stepped out to the sidewalk, squinting down toward the park. The faint echo of kids playing that had floated on the air earlier was gone now. The swing chain squeaked once, then stilled. He called out, easy at first, "Maddie, time's up, kiddo." His voice bounced off the houses and came back alone. No answering laugh, no running steps. Just the distant rush of the river. Laura joined him at the front gate, wiping her hands on her scrub pants now. Maybe she stopped at Jenny's, she suggested, but her voice didn't sound convinced. They walked quickly to the park, passing Mrs. Collins, who had risen half out of her porch swing, a question already written across her lined face. "She come by here?" Tom asked. Mrs. Collins shook her head, slow and worried. The park sat small and harmless behind its low chain-link fence. One swing hung crooked, rocking slightly in the breeze as if someone had just jumped off. A lonely chalk hopscotch grid was fading on the sidewalk nearby, not Maddie's, but close enough to sting. Tom scanned the slide, the bench, the patch of worn-out grass where kids played tag. There was space everywhere for one small girl to be. She simply wasn't. Back at the house, Laura grabbed her phone with hands that didn't feel like her own. She called Jenny's mother, then the house on the next corner, then the small church office 3 doors down. Rapid fire, each answer the same gentle no. When her fingers finally hovered over 911, something inside her clenched. You didn't call that number unless it was real. The quiet stretching between rings told her it already was. On the other side of town, in the concrete coolness of the K-9 wing, Odin's ears flicked before the phone even finished its first urgent buzz. He lifted his head, dark eyes cutting toward the hallway. The door opened, and Deputy Harper strode in, ponytail frayed from the long shift she thought had finally ended. She stopped at his kennel, and in that short pause their day turned back on. She snapped the latch open with a click that always woke something coiled and ready in him. "Missing girl, 6 years old, Maple and 3rd," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Odin pushed out of the kennel like a spring, nails ticking on the floor, body shifting from rest to purpose in one breath. The world outside might see lights and uniforms. He smelled one thing: fear rising on the wind. Minutes later, the K-9 SUV rolled up to Maple Street without siren, only the pulse of its lights cutting across the small houses. Neighbors were already gathering on lawns, arms folded tight, faces pale in the flashing colors. Tom stood in the driveway, phone still in his hand, Laura beside him with a dish towel clenched like a bandage. When Harper stepped out and opened the back door, Odin jumped down, weight solid, presence heavier than his size. Harper knelt by the sidewalk and held out Maddie's denim backpack. "This hers?" she asked quietly. Laura nodded, unable to speak. Odin lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he pulled in the scent woven deep into the fabric. Soap, crayons, a sweet trace of bubble gum, the faint, warm note that meant child. His muscles tightened. The world narrowed to that invisible trail, bright in his mind like a line of light. He surged forward, pulling Harper down the block, past the park where human eyes had already found nothing. He barely paused at the swings, instead diving toward the narrow alley that cut between the back fences, where the grass smelled cooler and the air held a different kind of stillness. His nose skimmed over trampled weeds, a fallen juice box, the sharp metal tang of a passing truck. The line of Maddie's scent ran like thread between them all. At the edge of the alley, the ground dipped slightly toward the river. Ahead, a rusted chain-link fence guarded the old maintenance yard, its gate secured with a thick city lock. Odin reached it and stopped so fast Harper had to brace her feet. He paced the fence, nose pressed to the metal, breathing hard, tail stiff. Beyond, the dark shapes of sheds and a squat concrete building huddled together like something hiding. A flashlight beam swept the fence from the other side as a man in a faded city utility jacket approached, rain-soaked cap pushed back on thinning hair. "Name's Rick," he said, lifting his ID badge. "City maintenance. This place has been shut down for years. Pumps got moved downstream. You folks really think she came through here?" Harper opened her mouth, but Odin answered first, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. The dog pressed his paws hard against the bottom rung of the fence, claws scraping, nose working, like he could drag the ground itself closer. The girl's scent was here, tangled in rust and oil and old damp concrete, and then, maddeningly, gone. It didn't drift away toward town or slip down the hill to the river. It simply stopped at that fence line like someone had picked her up and stepped into a different air. For the next hour, officers fanned out along the riverbank and through the neighboring streets, radios crackling with coordinates and negative sightings. Odin worked each suggestion they offered him, circling, double-checking, but always he came back to that same ugly strip of chain link and the dark yard beyond. By the time the sun slid under the trees and the first cool fingers of night reached up from the water, his flanks rose and fell with a quiet, frustrated burn. Finally, the watch commander called it. Full search grid in the morning, more volunteers, boats at first light. Flashlights clicked off one by one as neighbors drifted back to their porches, unwilling to go inside yet, but too tired to stand in the yard. Harper led Odin back toward the SUV, giving Tom and Laura a look that held apology and stubborn promise at the same time. Behind her, Odin cast one last look over his shoulder at the fence, ears pricked toward the silent yard, as if memorizing it for a fight he wasn't done with. The house felt wrong the moment Tom and Laura stepped inside, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Laura moved through the living room slowly, touching Maddie's crayons on the table, her tiny sneakers by the door. Each object sat exactly where a child should be, but the stillness around them felt heavier than silence, like something had closed its hand around the air. Tom dropped onto the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the front door as if it might swing open any second. His mind kept replaying the moment he'd said yes to 5 minutes, the way Maddie had smiled over her shoulder. That smile kept slipping into every thought, bright and careless, now sharp enough to hurt. He pressed his palms together to stop them from shaking. Out in the dark driveway, neighbors lingered with flashlights, talking in low voices. Their shadows moved across the windows like drifting shapes, stretching long across the curtains. Laura kept glancing toward them, hoping for a knock that would say someone had found something. Anything. Instead, only the soft tick of the kitchen clock answered her, marking minutes she couldn't bear to count. Across town, the K-9 wing was dim except for one strip of overhead light. Odin lay in his kennel, breath steady but eyes wide open, staring at the hall as if he could hear the missing child's name settling into the concrete. Harper had taken him out earlier, hoping he'd rest, but he'd paced in circles before finally lying down. Watchful, wired, waiting for a command, no one had spoken yet. Sometime past 11, the quiet inside the house grew so thick Laura couldn't sit still. She went to Maddie's room, pushing the door open just enough to let the nightlight spill across the small bed. The blankets were rumpled, the stuffed rabbit still tucked under the pillow. She picked up the rabbit and pressed her face into the soft fur, breathing in the faint trace of bubblegum shampoo Maddie loved, letting the tears come without fighting them. Tom stood in the hallway, not wanting to intrude, but unable to walk away. He rested his hand on the doorframe, listening to Laura's muffled sob, the kind that carried years of fear compacted into one night. He reached out as if to touch her shoulder, then stopped. Guilt, making him feel like he didn't have the right. She had trusted him with 5 minutes. He had trusted the world with too much. Back at the station, Harper finished her paperwork and hung her radio on the wall. She rubbed the tension from her neck, hearing the last officer's footsteps fade down the hall. When she turned her head, Odin was already sitting up in his kennel, ears forward, body carved in alert stillness. "Not tonight, boy," she whispered. But Odin didn't blink. Something in him was listening beyond her voice. Moments later, Odin stood. No bark, no whine, just a shift of energy so sudden, Harper took a step back. Before she could reach the latch, he struck the bottom corner of the kennel gate, exactly where the latch met the frame. It snapped open with a metallic crack. Harper gasped as Odin slipped past her, nails scraping the floor, racing toward the exit with the certainty of a creature following more than scent, following instinct. On Maple Street, inside the dim living room, Laura wiped her cheeks and returned to the couch beside Tom. They sat in a silence made of too many unsaid fears. Tom opened his mouth to speak, something simple, like, "We'll find her," though he didn't believe it. But the words never formed. A faint noise brushed against the window. Soft at first, then again, sharper, deliberate. Tom's head snapped up. Laura stiffened. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the sound came once more. 3 taps, slow and measured, followed by a fourth that scraped just enough to raise chills. Tom stood abruptly, his breath held somewhere between hope and dread. He crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled back the curtain. What he saw stole the air from his lungs. Odin stood on the porch, rain-soaked, breath fogging the glass. His front paws pressed against the window, claws dragging lightly in a familiar rhythm. In his mouth hung a small blue keychain dangling from its silver ring. The plastic letters MADDIE swung gently, catching the porch light with each movement. Tom staggered backward, Laura's hand flying to her mouth in a trembling gasp. Harper rushed up the sidewalk seconds later, rain plastering her hair to her forehead, breath ragged. "He broke the kennel," she said, "ran straight here." She reached for Odin's harness, but the dog didn't move. He only stared through the glass, eyes locked on Laura with a force that felt like language. Something was wrong. Something was urgent, and this was the only way he knew to say it. Tom pushed the window open a few inches. The cold air rushed in, snapping Laura's breath as Odin stepped closer, dropping the keychain into Tom's shaking hand. Mud clung to the edges of the plastic letters, and a faint smear of river silt streaked across the ring. Laura whispered, "She had that on her backpack this morning." Her voice cracked. "She never takes it off." The house fell silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This, one hummed with a terrible possibility. Odin stepped back from the window, turning his head toward the dark street as if expecting them to follow. His tail didn't wag. His ears stayed sharply forward, fixed on something beyond human sight. In the distance, the river murmured, soft and steady, like a warning carried on the wind. Morning crept in without bringing rest. Tom and Laura drifted through the house like people who had forgotten what to do with their hands. The keychain lay in a plastic evidence bag on the coffee table, blue letters pressed flat together. Outside the window, the street looked the same as always, but to them it felt like a different town, a place where even the sunshine had a nervous edge. Down at the station, Odin paced the narrow run between his kennel walls, nails clicking on concrete. He had been hauled back in the middle of the night, praised and scolded in the same breath, then shut behind the latch again. The scent of Maddie's keychain still clung to his whiskers and tongue. Rest wouldn't come. Every few steps he circled, nose toward the door, pulling at the invisible line that still tugged him toward Maple Street. The second day of searching began with coffee in paper cups and maps spread across the hood of a patrol car. Volunteers clustered in little knots, arms folded against the morning chill. Boats slid into the river. Officers waded through tall grass along the bank. Harper leaned against her SUV, eyes gritty, one hand resting unconsciously on the K-9 crate door, as if to steady herself on the dog she couldn't let out yet. When the commander mentioned the keychain, he did it with a shrug toward a luck. "Probably came off in the struggle," he said. "Dog just did what dogs do. Found it." Harper looked down at the metal ring in the evidence bag, then at Odin's crate. He hadn't just found it. He had broken free and carried it straight to the girl's front window, like a delivery he knew had one address only. That part no one seemed eager to talk about. Later that afternoon, Odin was finally brought back to the maintenance yard with Harper at his side. The air there smelled of oil, rust, old water, and something else he didn't like. His body tightened the moment his paws hit the gravel. He pulled hard toward the same stretch of fence where Maddie's scent had ended the night before, nose dragging along the bottom rung, inhaling every inch of earth as if the ground were hiding words. On the other side of the fence, the same low concrete buildings huddled under the sky, their windows blank. Rick stood near the gate, jingling a ring of keys, his orange city issue vest bright against the gray. "Told you, nothing but dead pumps and junk," he called. Odin stopped and stared at him, ears pitched forward, head tilted slightly. The man smelled of damp concrete and metal, but underneath it was a thin, sour note that made the dog's lips twitch back over his teeth. Harper tugged the lead gently. "Leave it, Odin," she said out of habit. He obeyed with his body, stepping back, but his eyes never left the fence and the man beyond it. The girl's scent was there somewhere, trapped in the mesh of rust and time, mixed with the neighbors and the rivers and the faint echo of something that had been carried away. It gnawed at him in a way simple failure never had. By evening, the search teams thinned out. Porch lights flicked on up and down Maple Street, like a line of small beacons refusing to give up. Jenny sat on her own front steps with her phone in her hand, thumb hovering over last night's video of Odin at the Madden's window. She pressed play again and watched the dog's paws tap against the glass, listened to the soft, rhythmic knocks. 3 light taps, 1 longer scrape. It didn't sound random anymore. Across the street, Mrs. Collins wrapped her cardigan tighter and watched the empty sidewalk. "He'll be back," she said quietly when Jenny's mom came out to call her in. "Dogs like that don't just try once." Jenny glanced at the house where Tom and Laura sat in the dim living room, shadows moving past the window. She wanted to believe the old woman was just comforting herself, but something in the way she said it felt like weather forecast rather than wish. The night settled in heavier than the one before. Inside their house, Tom and Laura kept the lamps low, as if bright light might scare away any good news that wanted to knock. The television sat silent. The radio stayed off. Every small sound, pipes creaking, a car passing, the wind against the siding, made them glance toward the front of the house with the same tight question in their eyes. At almost the exact same time as the night before, Odin stirred in his kennel. That invisible thread tugged again, harder, more insistent. He stood, muscles coiling, ears tuned to something beyond the station walls. Harper, filling out yet another report at her desk, felt rather than heard him. "Don't," she muttered, already getting up. But by the time she reached the row of kennels, he had hit the latch just right, gate springing open with a sharp, accusing clang. On Maple Street, the first hint was not a sound, but a feeling, the way air seems to thicken right before thunder. Then it came. Tap, tap, tap. Scrape. This time the rhythm was clearer, more deliberate. Laura froze halfway between the couch and the hallway. Tom set his coffee cup down so quickly it sloshed over the rim. They moved together toward the window, hearts pounding in a sync they hadn't shared in days. Odin was there again, framed in the porch light, chest heaving from the run. His paws struck the glass in the same pattern Jenny had replayed all afternoon. 3 quick taps, 1 long drag. His eyes shifted between Tom and Laura, then toward the dark street that led back to the river and the fenced-off pumps. Behind him, distant sirens whined as Harper's SUV came searching yet again for the dog who refused to stay where he was told. The third evening slipped in quieter than the ones before, as if the town itself were tired of holding its breath. Streetlights blinked on one by one, painting Maple Street in soft circles of yellow. Inside the Madden house, lamps stayed low, coffee cooled in mugs no one remembered pouring. Tom and Laura moved less now, as if each step cost more than it used to. Odin felt the change long before the clock reached that familiar hour. At the station, he lay in his kennel, not asleep, not awake, simply waiting in that thin space between. The girl's scent still threaded through his mind, anchored to rust and wet earth. Every time he closed his eyes, he smelled it ending at that fence, the way a trail ends at a wall. It didn't sit right in his bones. Harper sat at her desk, the blue glow of the computer washing the lines of fatigue across her face. Reports, maps, voicemail from frightened neighbors, they all blurred into one long ache. Behind her she heard Odin's soft whine. It wasn't loud, hardly more than a breath, but it carried something unsettled. "Easy, boy," she said without turning. "We're going back out in the morning." The kennel latch snapped against metal a heartbeat later. She spun around just in time to see Odin throw his weight into the weak spot he'd already memorized. The gate bounced open, clanging off the wall. This time there was no hesitation in him at all. He didn't look back for permission. He simply ran, nails throwing sparks of sound against the concrete as he followed that invisible pull toward Maple Street. At the house, Tom and Laura had stopped pretending to watch television. The screen sat dark, reflecting their faces back at them in faint outline. Laura stood at the sink, rinsing a dish that was already clean. She heard it before Tom did, a hollow echo along the siding, then the now familiar sequence at the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Scrape. Her hand froze under the running water. Tom reached the window first, pulling the curtain aside with fingers that had learned the weight of dread. Odin stood there again on the porch, chest heaving, fur damp with night air. Mud clung to his paws and chest in dark patches. Between his teeth, held carefully, was something small and rectangular, edges caked with dirt. A thin, pale strand fluttered from one corner like a tiny flag. When Tom cracked the window open, Odin stepped forward and dropped the object into his palm. It was a city utility ID badge, the plastic cloudy from age, the logo of the town's public works department still visible under the grime. Stuck to the clip, tangled in the dried mud, was a single long hair, yellow blonde, the same shade Laura had brushed from Maddie's forehead every morning. Laura pressed her hand to her chest, knees going weak. "Tom," she whispered, the word barely there. He held the badge closer to the lamp. The name was faded, but the department title was clear. Public Utilities. The same crew that handled the river gates, the old pumps, the forgotten buildings by the fence where Odin had gone wild. The dog's eyes never left their faces, searching them as if waiting for them to understand. Headlights swung into the driveway. Harper jumped out of the SUV, breath puffing in the cool air. "I swear I locked him in," she said, frustration and worry tangled together. When Tom showed her the badge in the evidence bag, her expression shifted. She looked at Odin, at the mud on his legs. "Where did you get this, boy?" Odin stepped back toward the street, then forward again, tail rigid, body speaking urgency in every line. On the sidewalk nearby, Jenny had been filming from her front steps again, phone half hidden behind a porch post. She caught the pattern of Odin's paws on the glass the moment he dropped the badge into Tom's hand, the way Laura staggered back as if struck. Later, in her room, she would replay the sound of those taps in slow motion, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3. And one more, longer. A few houses down, Mr. Ray sat at his kitchen table with an old folded map of the town spread out in front of him. The news of the missing girl had pulled it from a drawer for the first time in years. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't notice. His eyes kept drifting to a tiny mark near the river, a little hand-drawn symbol he'd made decades ago when he was still walking mail routes and tracking flood zones. 3 short lines. 1 long. Pump Station 31. When Jenny's mother called to check on him and mentioned the dog's strange knocking at the window, the pattern tugged at Ray's memory. 3 quick taps, 1 drag. He stared at the little symbol on the map and felt something cold slide down his spine. Out his front window, he could just see the silhouette of Odin standing on the Maddens' porch, body still, head lifted toward the dark line of the river road. Back in the living room, Harper slipped the badge carefully into a fresh evidence bag. "It could have been dropped anywhere," she said, but the words sounded thin even to her. Odin gave a low, impatient whine and nudged the doorframe with his nose, then glanced toward the street again. The girl's scent was still on that plastic, faint but real. It matched the fence, matched the pumps, matched the place no one had been allowed to look. Tom looked from the badge to Odin and back again. "He didn't bring this to the station," he said quietly. "He brought it here, to us." Laura tightened her grip on his arm, the weight of that truth pressing down. The dog had crossed town again in the dark, not to show an officer, not to drop evidence in a parking lot, but to bang on the window of a mother and father who hadn't been allowed near the search grid. That had to mean something. Outside, the night settled around them, cool and heavy. Harper clipped Odin's lead back on, feeling him pull toward the road even as she held him in place. "Tomorrow," she murmured into the thick fur at his neck. "We'll go back there tomorrow." Odin stood rigid, eyes fixed on the direction of the old pump yard, chest rising in slow, controlled breaths. Tomorrow was a word people used. In his mind, the trail was happening now, every second growing fainter. By the next afternoon, the town moved a little slower, like everyone was walking through deeper water. Rain clouds stacked up over the river, dark and heavy, but hadn't opened yet. Inside his small kitchen, Mr. Ray spread the old flood map across his table again, smoothing the creases with hands that shook just a little more than they used to. He traced the blue line of the river, the tiny black squares for pump houses and gates. Near the edge of town, by the scribbled-in maintenance yard, his own handwriting stared back at him from years ago. 3 short marks, 1 longer stroke. Pump Station 31. The symbol looked so ordinary he almost laughed at himself for feeling afraid of ink and paper. Almost. On her bedroom floor, Jenny sat cross-legged with her phone in her hand and earbuds in. She rewound last night's video of Odin at the Madden's window again, turning the volume up, then down, then up, tap, tap, tap. Scrape. Every time she counted under her breath, 1, 2, 3, and 1 more dragged a little longer. It wasn't a dog pawing at random. It sounded like a pattern someone meant. Laura didn't need patterns or maps to feel the weight in the air. She felt it pressing down on her in Maddie's room. She sat on the edge of the small bed, the pink comforter untouched since the day her daughter vanished. The stuffed rabbit lay on the pillow where she'd left it. Laura pulled it into her lap, fingers twisting the worn ears, the smell of bubblegum shampoo, now a ghost more than a scent. Tom stood in the doorway, shoulder rested against the frame, watching the way Laura's back shook in small, silent shivers. He wanted to say something solid and strong, something a father and husband was supposed to say. His mouth opened, then closed again. Words felt useless when his mind kept looping back to a 5-minute promise and a street corner that swallowed a child whole. At the station, Odin lay in his kennel, but his body was nowhere near sleep. Every cell seemed tuned toward a point outside the walls, along the river, by the rusted fence. He could still taste the faint salt of Maddie's skin in the memory of the badge clip, still smell her fear caught in the metal and mud. Humans like to say later and tomorrow. His instincts did not understand those words. Near dinner time, a soft knock came at the Madden's front door. Laura wiped her face and stepped into the hallway just as Tom opened it. Mr. Ray stood there in an old flannel shirt, map rolled under his arm. Behind him, Jenny shifted from foot to foot, her phone clutched like a secret she wasn't sure she should show. "We need to talk." "About that dog of yours," Ray said quietly. At the kitchen table, the map unfurled like a second, older version of the town. Ray tapped the symbol near the river. "That's Pump Station 31, he explained. "Back when I walked mail and these things mattered, we marked it like this. 3 short lines, 1 long. Easy way to remember." Jenny set her phone down beside the map and hit play. The sound of Odin's knocks filled the room. Tap, 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 scrape. The rhythm slotted into Ray's symbol so neatly, no one spoke for a moment. Tom stared at the map, then at the window, almost able to see the old pump house through the glass and trees. Laura gripped the edge of the table. "You think he's showing us that place?" she asked, her voice raw. Jenny swallowed. "He keeps looking toward the river when he does it," the girl said. "I've seen him." A car door slammed outside, sharp in the thickening air. Through the front window, they could see Rick's city truck parked by the curb, orange vest bright even on a gray evening. He walked up the path with a cardboard tray of coffees, rehearsed concern arranged neatly on his face. "Thought you might need these," he said when Tom opened the door. "No one sleeps much through something like this." Odin's reaction, miles away in his kennel, might as well have matched Laura's ribs. The moment Rick's scent drifted into the house, something inside her flinched without reason. At the table, she watched his eyes land on the spread-out map, on the little handwritten mark for Pump Station 31, then on Jenny's phone still playing the muffled echo of paws on glass. For a heartbeat, his smile didn't quite keep up with his eyes. In that very moment back at the station, Odin stood abruptly, head lifting, nostrils flaring toward the hallway. He couldn't smell coffee or maps, but he knew the blend of odors that clung to Rick's jacket: old water, metal, oil, and that sour coiled note he'd caught by the fence. His body reacted before thought, muscles tightening, a low growl rising like a storm building at sea. Harper looked up, pen pausing over her report. By the time the sky bruised to deep purple, Rick had gone, leaving the coffees and a flimsy layer of reassurance behind. Tom poured his down the sink without tasting it. Laura went back to Maddie's room, but she didn't sit this time. She knelt by the bed, pressing her forehead into the mattress, words spilling out that weren't really prayers, just a mother talking to a child she could no longer see. The house was quiet again when the first drops of rain began to hit the roof. Tom had just turned off the last lamp when that familiar, unnerving rhythm cut through the patter. Tap, tap, tap. Scrape. It was louder in the dark, clearer, like the dog had dropped all attempts at being gentle. Laura froze in the hallway. For a second she almost didn't move, as if afraid answering it might make the truth real. Then she went to the window. Odin stood there in the rain, fur slicked against his body, eyes burning with a fierce, desperate focus. His paws struck the glass in the same code Ray had traced on the map. 3 quick taps, 1 long drag down the pane, leaving muddy streaks like lines on paper. When Laura pressed her hand to the glass opposite his, he stopped tapping and held her gaze, chest heaving, every breath a plea. Something inside her gave way. "If you know where she is," Laura whispered, voice shaking but steady enough for him to hear through the glass, "I'll follow you. I don't care who tells me not to." Odin's ears flicked at her tone. He dropped back onto all fours, turned toward the river road, then looked over his shoulder, making sure she and Tom were watching. His tail didn't wag. It pointed like an arrow. Harper's SUV rolled up seconds later, wipers beating hard against the growing rain. She stepped out already scolding, but the words died when she saw Odin's paws on the glass, the muddy lines, the look on Laura's face. Tom stepped onto the porch. "We know where he's trying to take us," he said hoarsely, "and I think if we wait one more night, we're going to be too late." The storm rumbling over the river answered for her. Harper looked from Tom to Laura, then down at Odin, who stood at the edge of the porch now, body angled toward the dark road like a runner waiting for a gunshot. Lightning flickered far off, outlining the low shape of the old pump yard on the horizon. Regulations, reports, orders, all of it weighed on her shoulders. But beside that weight stood a soaked K-9 who had broken out 3 nights in a row to knock on the same window with a message no one else could deliver. She exhaled slowly, rain dripping from the brim of her hat. "Get your coats," she said. "Ray and that map are coming with us, and he—" she rested a hand on Odin's wet neck— "is in charge of the route." Odin surged forward at the first step toward the street, pulling them into the deepening storm. The town watched from behind curtains as a small group followed a dog down toward the river, chasing a hope only he could smell. Rain met them halfway down the hill, first as a mist, then as sharp, cold needles driven sideways by the wind. Odin didn't slow. His paws hit the wet pavement with a steady, powerful rhythm, breath puffing white in the flashes of passing headlights. The leash in Harper's hand felt less like control and more like a thin line tying them all to whatever truth he was running toward. Tom kept one hand on Laura's back as they hurried behind, shoes slipping in the growing slick. Ray rode with Jenny in Harper's SUV, the old map spread on his knees, wipers thumping time with his heart. Trees along the river bent and shivered, their branches clawing at the sky. The shape of the maintenance yard rose ahead, low and dark against the storm-lit horizon, like something the town had tried to forget. The gate was still chained and locked when they reached it, rain gleaming on the thick metal links. Odin lunged toward the bottom, nose shoving against the small gap where rust had eaten away at the post. He inhaled hard, tail stiff, then let out a bark that cut through wind and thunder both. Not a warning bark, a declaration. Whatever he'd been chasing lived beyond that fence. Harper didn't waste time arguing with padlocks and procedures. She snapped the car's spotlight on, washed the yard in harsh white, then yanked a pair of bolt cutters from the back. The metal chain bit and groaned before giving way with a jolt. As the gate swung open, Odin surged ahead, dragging the line through her wet fingers, arrowing toward the squat concrete building that housed the pump controls. Up close, the building looked less like a workplace and more like a bunker, its small windows, dark eyes watching the river. Odin ignored the main door entirely. He veered to the side, nose low, claws scraping over broken concrete until he reached a narrow metal hatch, recessed into the foundation beneath a rusted stairway. He jammed his nose into the gap, then began to paw at it with frantic scraping strokes. Harper shined her flashlight down, squinting through the spray. The hatch had a newer lock on it, shiny against the corroded metal around it, like a fresh scar on old skin. Tom's stomach twisted. "That doesn't look shut down for years," he muttered. Odin's paws hit the door harder, each blow echoing up through their feet, up into their chests, rattling something instinctive and ancient. Laura crouched beside the hatch, rain soaking her hair flat against her face. "Maddie?" she called, her voice thin against the storm. At first there was only the rush of wind and the slap of rain on concrete. Then, faint as a memory, came a small, hesitant sound from somewhere below. Tap, 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 and then a weaker, dragging scrape, as if tiny knuckles were copying a language they'd only just learned. The world narrowed to that sound. Odin froze, ears pitched forward, eyes burning into the metal at his feet. A low, trembling whine rose from his chest, unlike anything he'd made before. Harper's hands shook as she radioed for backup, then jammed the bolt cutters over the new lock. It snapped with a hollow pop. Odin was already trying to nose the hatch open before she could pull it clear. A sour, stale air rolled up from the dark below, thick with concrete dust, old sweat, and something else. Fear baked into cinder block. Harper went first down the narrow metal ladder, flashlight beam jittering on the walls. Odin stayed at the top, pacing in tight circles, barking once, then twice, as if pushing them forward with sound. Laura's grip on the rung slipped once. Tom's hand closed over hers, steadying her descent. At the bottom, the small room opened like a secret no one should have to keep. Bare concrete walls, a single dangling bulb swinging. In the drafts, shadows jerking in nervous circles. Against one wall lay a thin mattress, a blanket twisted into knots. In the far corner, huddled into herself, knees up to her chest, was a small figure in an oversized t-shirt, hair matted, eyes too big for her pale face. Maddie, Laura breathed, the name leaving her like air from a punctured lung. The little girl flinched at the sudden light, then blinked, trying to focus. When she recognized her mother's voice, her shoulders crumpled forward in a sob that hardly made any sound. "Mommy?" The word cracked in the middle, fragile, but alive. Laura crossed the room so fast she stumbled, dropping to her knees and gathering her daughter in shaking arms. Tom reached them a heartbeat later, one hand flattening against Maddie's back, the other gripping Laura's shoulder as if to convince himself they were both real. For a few precious seconds, the storm, the room, the whole world vanished. There was only the small weight of a child between them, the thready warmth of her breath against Laura's neck, the feeling of a promise kept far too late, but not too late to matter. A soft rustle by the crates pulled Harper's attention. She swung the light and froze. Another child, a little older, sat wedged between boxes, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around thin shins. A boy this time, maybe 7, eyes hollow with the kind of tired no child should know. He flinched at the light, then looked past it, toward the ladder, as if expecting heavy footsteps to come clanging down. Above them, Odin's bark changed. It sharpened, turned from urging to warning. His nails scrabbled against the concrete floor near the open hatch, tail stiff as iron. He smelled something new now, wet wool, diesel fumes, and a familiar sour scent moving in the yard above. The captor was back. Odin planted himself at the edge of the opening, muscles bunched, every nerve lit. Below, in the cramped cold room, the children were finally found. But up top, another part of the hunt had just begun. Thunder rumbled farther away now, more like an old argument than an active threat. Up in the yard, the rain eased from a hard pounding to a steady curtain. Odin stood at the open hatch, every muscle locked, nose lifted into the wet wind. The scent drifting toward him was no longer memory. It was here, fresh and moving, claws of fear and anger wrapped around it. A shadow crossed the beam of the spotlight, long and hunched. Rick stepped into view near the corner of the building, drenched, his city jacket plastered to his back. For a split second he froze at the sight of the open hatch and the cutlock lying on the concrete. Then his gaze landed on Odin, teeth bared in a low, rolling growl that didn't sound like any dog he'd ever met on a friendly route. Harper climbed the last rungs of the ladder and hauled herself onto the surface in time to see Rick's hand jerk toward his pocket. "Don't move," she shouted over the wind. "Gun." Trained steady despite the rain. He lifted his hands halfway, palms out, mouth already forming some excuse about checking storm damage. But his eyes slid toward the river, toward a small aluminum boat rocking against its rope. The moment his weight shifted, Odin launched. Years of training and something much older than training took over. He hit Rick square in the chest, driving him backward onto the slick ground. Teeth clamped into the padded jacket, not to tear, but to hold. Rick thrashed, boots scraping, one heel catching the hatch cover with a clang that rang down into the chamber where the children had just been found. Tom, halfway up the ladder with Maddie in his arms, felt the vibration and looked up. Laura clutched their daughter tighter. "Is it him?" she whispered. Tom didn't answer, but Maddie did. Eyes wide, voice a hoarse whisper, she said, "He's back. The man from up there, the one who kept turning the light off." Below them, the little boy trembled, staring at the ceiling as if it might crack open. Sirens grew louder, weaving through the storm like thin, bright threads. Harper held her stance, shouting orders Rick barely heard. His world had narrowed to the weight on his chest and the hot breath at his throat. He tried once more to roll, to fling the dog off and make a wild dash toward the boat. Odin adjusted, shifting his grip, pinning him with the full, unyielding force of a body that refused to let evil move 1 inch closer to the water. Patrol cars slid to a stop at the edge of the yard, doors flying open. Officers sprinted through the mud, their shouts scattering across the wind. In the sweep of red and blue, Rick's wrists were wrenched behind him, metal cuffs snapping shut with finality. Only then did Harper give the release command. Odin stepped back, chest heaving, mud splashed up his legs, eyes still locked on the man he'd finally cornered. By the time Tom and Laura reached the surface, medics were already guiding Maddie and the boy toward waiting ambulances. Blankets swallowed their small shoulders, IV bags swinging like pale lanterns. Laura never let go of her daughter's hand, even as they lifted her onto the stretcher. Maddie turned her head, searching the shadows until her gaze found a familiar silhouette standing near the patrol car, ears forward, tail slowly lifting. "Mom," she whispered, voice rasping. "That's him. That's the window dog." Laura followed her eyes and saw Odin, soaked and dirty and utterly still, watching her girl with a quiet intensity that held no panic now, only relief. Laura lifted her free hand in a small, grateful wave. Odin's tail thumped once against the bumper, a tired soldier's salute. Morning reached the hospital before it reached anyone's sleep. The storm had scraped the sky clean, leaving a soft, washed-out light that poured through tall windows. In a small room off the pediatric wing, Maddie lay propped against pillows, color just beginning to return to her cheeks. Tom sat in the chair at her bedside, fingers threaded through hers. Laura hovered near the foot of the bed, afraid that if she sat, she'd never stand up again. Down the hall, the little boy's mother arrived from the neighboring town, eyes swollen, hands shaking. The moment she saw her son, a sound broke from her that made nurses pause and swallow hard. For a few minutes, the building seemed to hold only that reunion. One woman's arms finally closing around the child she'd been sure was gone forever. Out in the waiting area, officers and medics leaned back in their chairs and let themselves breathe. Harper brought Odin to the hospital parking lot late that afternoon, more as a courtesy than protocol. Word had spread faster than any official report ever could. A small cluster of reporters waited by the doors, cameras ready. Behind a second-floor window, a small hand appeared, fingers splayed against the glass. Odin looked up, and for a heartbeat, the busy lot fell away. It was just him and the girl he'd been running toward for days. Tom stepped outside at the request of the news crew, squinting into the sunlight, exhaustion carving new lines into his face. Microphones hovered, questions buzzing. He cleared his throat, searching for something that wasn't anger or fear. "Their daughter disappears," he said slowly, glancing back at the window where Maddie watched. And hours later, a police K-9 taps on the glass with the first clue anyone bothered to see. He swallowed. If a good dog tries that hard to tell you something's wrong, you listen. Odin stood by Harper's side through it all, panting softly, the weight of the long week showing under his eyes. He didn't understand interviews or headlines. He knew only that the sharp edge of the girl's scent had softened, that her fear no longer clung to the air like smoke. His job, as far as he was concerned, had been simple. Follow the trail no one else could see and keep tapping until somebody opened the door. That night, back on Maple Street, the house looked almost the same as it always had. Toys still sat in corners. Chalk still marked the driveway, though the rain had blurred the edges of the drawings. Inside, Maddie slept in her own bed again, one small hand wrapped tightly around the ear of her stuffed rabbit. Tom and Laura sat together in the living room, not talking much, just listening to the ordinary creaks of a house holding a family that had come back from the edge. At one point, without meaning to, Laura glanced toward the front window, half expecting to see a dark shape pressed against the glass. It was empty now, just her reflection and the glow of the street lamp. She stood anyway and walked to the glass, resting her palm where muddy paw prints had once streaked down in urgent lines. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet, not sure if she was speaking to the dog, the night, or something beyond both. Across town, in the dim K-9 wing of the station, Odin curled in his kennel on a fresh blanket. His paws twitched once, then stilled. Outside, the river moved on, the pumps hummed in other stations, and the town eased itself back into ordinary routines. But on one blue-painted house near the bend, a front window would never be just a window again. It would always be the place where a desperate, stubborn K-9 had come knocking with the truth, and where, finally, a family had listened. Chop me again. If this story moved you even a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you were here. Your support helps these gentle K-9 stories reach more people who need them. And if you'd like to hear the next story, another quiet human moment between a family and a loyal dog, go ahead and subscribe. I'd be honored to have you with us for the next chapter.